Okay, I'm going to start off with a poll question related to that assignment. So let me go ahead and launch this poll. And you're correct. It's an example of an invasive species. I had a few students that put overexploitation just because the disease is coming in sometimes, or potentially coming in on salamanders that are being shipped around, or frogs that are being shipped around in the pet trade. But this is not, the disease itself would be an invasive species. Overexploitation is just spreading the disease. So it's a much better example of an invasive species as opposed to overexploitation itself. The other thing I wanted to cover real quick was just this second question, asking which of the following strategies would be most effective for combating or preventing Bsal outbreaks. I don't want to go over my answers to each of these questions in detail, but I am going to sort of put up the explanations that I had for each one. These are the ones that I considered less useful. Quantifying ecosystem services, designated protected areas, ecosystem restoration in corridors. And these are the reasons for each of those things. Mostly it's hard to quantify salamanders and ecosystem service. A disease is going to go across protected areas, so that doesn't do a lot for you. Ecosystem restoration is not really relevant here. In corridors is just going to help spread the disease more than prevent the spread of it. And these are the ones that I counted as potentially useful. And these are the explanations for why each of those would be useful. And once again, I don't want to go through each of these explanations in painstaking detail because I think you guys have sort of thought it through, but I do want you to know that those explanations for here are here for you if you're having some issues. Are there any specific questions that people had regarding this quiz and these sort of conservation strategies that would be useful to combat against Bsal and that disease? If you've got specific questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat, and Claire and I will try to address them. If there are no questions, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Nothing? Okay. So just real quickly, I want to talk about some of the things that people are actually doing to prevent the spread of these chytrid fungi. So there's actually two species of chytrid fungi. There's one that kills frogs. There's another one that kills salamanders. And the one that's killing frogs has already spread into the US and sort of all over the world. This is different than the salamander one. But one thing that they're doing is basically making these things called frog pods. You can think of it sort of like Noah's Ark. They're these shipping containers that they can ship to anywhere in the world. So if the fungus looks like it's about to arrive somewhere, they'll ship this container out there. They'll load a bunch of frogs into the container, and then they'll let them have these special cages basically where they'll breed those frogs and keep them basically out of the population and breed them until they've got enough frogs and hopefully find some sort of cure for the fungus or cure from the disease or some way to immunize the frogs against the disease and then release them back into the wild. So it's essentially like a Noah's Ark for the frogs, and they're actively doing this right now. It's kind of crazy. Another thing that they're doing against Bsal, that's the one that you guys learned about that has not arrived in the US yet. One thing that they're doing is basically they proposed a ban on all amphibian imports to stop the spread of the disease and stop it from arriving in the US. And so there's actually been a ban put in place for the import and interstate trade of 201 species of salamanders that the US Fish and Wildlife Service put in place. So you can't move salamanders across state borders, and you can't import any of these 201 species into the US. And there's also been a call for a total ban on all amphibian imports. So they're saying even beyond those 201 species, let's ban everything. And they also want to develop these clean trade protocols where basically anything that's getting imported into the US or moved across state lines is getting like swabbed and checked whether or not it's infected before it moves. So these are some pretty good ideas that have come about to sort of prevent the spread of this disease. But I think it's important also to point out that these management plans don't come without costs. And so a lot of researchers and people involved in the salamander pet trade and pet stores are really frustrated with this interstate ban in the US, specifically because we know so far it's not arrived in the US. So why are we stopping people from moving salamanders across state borders and preventing people from doing commerce and doing business and doing research across state borders if the disease isn't here? And so a lot of people are really, really frustrated that the government's sort of thrown up these arbitrary blockers to prevent them from doing their business. And so that's just to sort of point out that anytime you enact some of these management plans, they also come at a cost.